Hello, welcome to Board Deck and Dice. Today we are giving you my opinion on Wayfinders from Pandasaurus Games. Wayfinders is a game. It's resource management. It's not pick up and deliver as it looks and as I mistakenly kind of said it was, much to the chagrin of my fellow game mates. But it's, well, I wouldn't even call it worker placement. Essentially on your go you have two options. You can place one of your people out onto the hangar board over here. And this might happen a few times. People might do this, say, I might go there, and then I might go there. Or the other option is that you can withdraw your people from the hangar, and you take resources when you do so. So if I were to take my two people back from here, I would take my two people back and I would take the top two resources. These are now mine. So then I can use these resources in a number of ways. The first thing is to move. I can move onto any space that already has a hangar on it for free, even if it's not my own. Sorry, these are not hangars. These are, let me just check the rules again. What are they? Airstrips. They're not airstrips, they're clearly hangars. Look, that is a hangar, not an airstrip. However, the game calls them airstrips. So I could move here for the cost of the space, which would be yellow. So I simply put that yellow back into the bag, and then I could move to this one because this one costs purple. Or once I've moved, I can pay resources matching the bottom to build a hangar on there, or an airstrip on there. So then I've moved there, that would cost me a yellow to build that. And then I'll get either the end game scoring bonus or the benefit. This benefit, for example, lets me keep one more resource, because at the end of your go, you always discard down to 3 resources after you've moved your airplane. Not if you place a worker, you're fine. No, you always discard. Always. No, I'm lying again. If you place out, you're fine. You don't discard down to 3. If you return workers, even if you're not taking any to move your aeroplane, then you must discard down. Now, if you are building an airstrip where someone already has an airstrip, the resources don't go to the bag, but the resources go to the player who has built there first. So getting your airstrips out on these islands is important, as is getting these upgrades and rewards. As the game goes on, it will become easier and easier to move around because there'll be airstrips everywhere, and the game enters its final round when a player has 2 or less airstrips left in their supply. There is a load of tiles that I haven't used, so it's always set up like this, but there's variety in there in terms of actions, and they're always set up randomly apart from the middle one. That is in essence Wayfinders. Like a plane without a navigation system, Wayfinders seems to have lost its way a bit. It pops off the table with cute little components and bright, vibrant art, but when you start to play it, it just feels like there's not much behind that. And when you look closer at the components, which look great from a distance, you find more disappointment. Nearly all of these plastic meeples I had to trim the bottom of the feet of so they would stand up somewhat straight, and some of them still have a drunken lean as they queue for their resources. This game is simple to teach because you have literally 2 choices. Place a person out onto the resource board or remove all your workers from that resource board. And that's it in terms of your choices. However, these choices are somewhat meaningless because when you're putting workers out here, it comes down to not really mattering which resources you grab. You can always move and do something, and you might not be able to do the ideal thing. You might have been planning to build this one that requires so many resources, but movement very quickly becomes easy. So you're generally using all your resources to build. Yes, there is a bit of a race at first to get your first airstrips out on the board, but even then it doesn't feel like that much of a choice. And because you are forced to spend your resources, you can only keep 3 unless you've made some upgrades, then you're going to spend them or waste them. So saving up long term for a big move is kind of not really possible. And I mean, one of the problems with the game is summed up in this kind of refusal to call these little things hangers, which they clearly are. But this is the hanger board, so these can't be called hangers, they must be airstrips. Well, don't design them like hangers then. It just creates added confusion that muddies the waters. Well, everything I've said so far makes this game sound like a gateway game, but as you start playing the game and getting more and more hangers or airstrips, see I've done it again, out onto the board, it becomes a bit of a confusing mess. The only way to track where you are with upgrades and with endgame scoring points is to look at this grid. And this grid is full of things that draw your eye, from the bright coloured pieces to the bright coloured art. In fact, the dullest thing to look at are the upgrades themselves, which are generally in black and white, apart from when they're referencing a resource. So the last thing you're drawn to look at is these upgrades. So when you move, there are certain upgrades that let you move free through certain coloured islands, and you'll be on your move go and you're going, right, I have to go here, I have to pay this, and then you're like, oh, did I get an island? Have I now got an island that lets me pay that? Because you don't really take the islands because of their abilities, you take them because you can afford them. And so knowing that you can now afford to move through this island or not, you don't really remember it, and the only information you have about all your upgrades and all your endgame scoring is on the board, and that just creates another visual problem and a kind of visual headache. But my biggest problem with Wayfinders is it's a game that plays relatively quickly but feels like it takes a lot longer to play. And after thinking about it, I can only think that that comes down to this resource board. The act of just placing one person out, although quick, is boring. There's not much to decide between them. Do you go somewhere where someone else is likely to take their people off first, so you're going to get random resources? Do you just try and stack all of yours up on one so you get 3 from that one? Do you even care? And I just found this bit so boring. I actually liked moving my plane around. I liked the puzzle of working out where I could go, despite the kind of inherent difficulties that this type of graphic design has. But I had to spend 3 or 4 turns before I could do that again and again and again until the end of the game, when you middle of the game, when you might have actually got some out first and people might decide to build things there and you might get some resources through that. It's a very strange one for me. Everything about this game said I should have liked it, from the cover, from the artwork, but it just doesn't do enough for me to justify it for my game group. And it does too much, confusingly, for me to justify it as a gateway game that I can, in good conscience, recommend. Now, I'm sure there are people out there who think I'm making a big fuss out of nothing, that this is a very eloquent way of doing things, that it doesn't really matter because the game only takes half an hour to an hour. But I can only report back how it went down with my game group and myself, and that is, I would like to be moving every time, doing something. Maybe I would have liked to be doing pick up and deliver. Maybe that makes more sense to me here. I don't want to be spending 3/4 of my turns in this game going like that, to basically work a placement where the action is always the same. It doesn't matter how many hangers there are, the action is always the same, and the kind of meta game that emerged from there was not of any significance. It was almost a bad joke. So that is Wayfinders, a game that, for me, I'm not really sure who this is for. A game that had problems from the naming of its components to the finishing of its components, that has great art that actually detracts from seeing what's going on, and has a large majority of the gameplay loop, which is just boring to me. I think it's perhaps highlighted because those turns where you're just doing that are so quick, whereas the turns where you're moving can actually be quite long, where you work out where you can go, because placement, you don't have to land on somewhere to place a hanger, you just have to pass through. So maybe that's a part of it too. Yeah, I'm sorry, I was really disappointed with this one. So let's go to my little bits I say at the end. Little bits. Let's go to my little bits. Rules. The rules were fine. The rules were great. The rules were easy to understand. So there was no problem there. Intimidation factor. Well, going from the rules, I didn't think there was any, but I would say that this is a confusing cacophony of colour that acts against itself, unfortunately. So that ramps the intimidation factor right up. One of the things my wife, who doesn't play games regularly, hates is cards with lots of different powers and lots of different icons. These are tiles that do exactly the same thing. Fun. Well, I had fun moving my little plane around the map, making engine sounds and pretending to shoot down everyone else. But that was far outweighed by the sheer tedium of placing these workers out onto the hangar board to get resources, which I would then have to use most of in that round, or at least that's how the game encouraged me. So I will not be keeping this one in my collection. If someone really wanted to play it, I'd play it again. Would I recommend it to people? There are literally hundreds of games I would recommend before this one, unfortunately. You might have different mileage of it depending on what you're looking for in a game, but for me and for my group, this was a big miss. Thanks very much for watching Board Deck and Dice. We will see you next time.